Hello to everybody today. I'm excited to be talking with HCL and anybody else who decided to HCIL and everybody else who decided to tune in to share the latest research that the students were involved in on understanding remote work. And that's part of the larger research that we've been doing at WITOP for the last, probably 9-ish years to understand issues in and around retaining women in tech and what helps women thrive. And I'm very excited to announce that our new book is just out, literally hot off the presses and in digital format. And you can see if you're at UMD, you can get it at your library. And there's a link to the Morgan Claypool website to buy it. And I'm also excited that Nicola Marston, who is my co-author, is here. So I'm going to contextualize the work on remote in terms of one of the focuses that we took in the project, which is the larger understanding of what's happening with women in tech. The body of research that we cover has had deep research from our perspective of 150 field interviews and over 1,000 surveys, and with many, many people worldwide in many professions, women and men. And the result of organizing this information is that we have understood the 6 factors that women need in order to thrive in our tech industry. And I'm going to talk about those in a moment. We also use the data to identify areas that we should inquire into more, because our goal is to redesign our practices in order for diverse teams to work better together. So I will be referencing some of those interventions that I think are related to some of the findings in remote work. So we're going to go on a little ride. We'll see how my timing goes. It was pretty good when I practiced yesterday, but one never knows. And if I am going way too fast, somebody needs to interrupt and let me know, okay? All right, so I want you to understand the at-work experience framework, because I'm going to talk a little bit about how remote impacts these dimensions. So these are the 6 factors that we uncovered that women really need to thrive, and that are very much related to retention, to, as we measured it, thinking of leaving their job. So let's take a look at these. The first is the dynamic valuing team. What does that mean? Women love being on a team, whether it's a product team, whether it's a partnership in doing research, whether it's a team just formed for a short time or a long time, which is very work focused, which has a great mission, which is highly interactive, where they feel that they are valued, where they are respected, where they are asked for their skill, where they lead, where they partner, where they follow. This is probably one of the single most important elements that keep women on the job and happy. And I'm going to say this once because it's true for all these factors. Unfortunately, of course, anybody wants to be on this amazing dynamic valuing team. But women, because of things going on in society, don't always get it. So we, in our book, we're focused on that great integration between the literature, what the research says, and what is going on in the qualitative data. So first, dynamic valuing team. Second, stimulating work. Their idea of what stimulating work is, okay? It is not necessarily socially relevant. Women don't need different kinds of work than men. What they need is hard technical problems, impactful research that affects the team, the product, the company, things that can make a difference in the world, things they connect to personally. This is what they want. They aren't looking for anything different than anybody else on a dynamic valuing team. What's third? The push and support, we call it. Women, and they think it's more often than men, may hesitate to take on a challenge or ask for a challenge to go after a promotion. They may have self-doubt. They may not think they're qualified. But if they are pushed or offered with support from a trusted relationship, whether it's family, professors, or in the case of work, managers and teammates, they rise to the occasion, they take on the challenge, and if they're given time to think it through, somebody to talk to, possibly coaching, the ability to fail. In other words, they have real support. They achieve these stretch goals. So maybe we don't like the idea. Sometimes we don't like the idea, but even I needed the push and support. So we got to understand what's really going on. All right, next one, which is related to this, local role models. Women need people doing their job, or perhaps their manager, who are near to them on the team, up one level, who show them what it's like to be in this company, in this job, and whether they really want to do the next thing. Local role models have two functions. The first is, if they have a balanced and appealing life that resonates with the life women want, then they may go after a promotion. But if it looks like there's too much backbiting, too much travel, too much not really fun, then they may not. And sometimes they get those experiences and really decide, no, I'm not being this manager. But local role models are also important in growing them as a professional. Whether these are now people in their field that have more experience to them, and if they partner together, if they're buddies, if they are helped by coaching and guidance to know what to do as they enter the field, hey, then they actually grow as a professional. So it's not those top people with those amazing jobs who are CEOs and also have children and I'm quoting one of our interviewees, wrote a children's book, okay? Yeah, it's good to know about them, but that sometimes makes you feel like you're not good enough. It's who's got a little more experience than you that really matters. All right, now, the last part of the first 5 factors, which are things companies can do to change the experience for women, is non-judgmental flexibility. Non-judgmental flexibility has to do with homework balance. If we look across all of the very challenging professions, business, iBankers, etc., there isn't really any difference in terms of what's going on with women's experience of benefits if they have kids or things like, in other words, it's all bad. But in our data, what we find is closer to understanding its relationship to the team. Non-judgmental flexibility says, what does the manager and the team do when the woman has demands at home? Are they inviting? Are they tolerant? Do they flex their schedules? Do they help them make sure they get things done? Do the men do it too? When the team flexes to what's really needed, when the manager says, hey, it's a priority to take care of home and we will work the work around it if that's necessary, then women thrive. So these are the dimensions of what is important in the company's response to a diverse team member. But we have to also understand that we bring our own attitude and our own understanding of ourselves to the table when we walk into the company. And so we call this personal power. When women have a sense of their own power, their own skills, their own value, they put themselves forward more, they do the work with greater confidence, they participate in the team more. But women don't always come in because of social factors, because of stereotyping, with that kind of confidence. Or they might think that if they put themselves forward, they may be slapped down for being arrogant. So what we've learned is, if the team, again, we're going back to managers and the team, if the managers and the team help them learn their own skills, champion them when they're doing well, guide them, then their self-esteem increases and their personal power increases, so that by mid-career, they feel like they're on top of things. And we talk a lot about early career because we find that 50% of women, and this isn't our data, this is larger data, will leave the career in tech within the first 12 years. And this is very different than non-STEM jobs. And so oftentimes when we think of early career, we might think of the first few years, but we're really seeing this as more of like the first 8 to 10 years till you really know how to negotiate everything. Now, if we take a step back and we had the work experience measure, and this is how we understood the relationship between these factors and women's experiences, we found that about 45% of women in tech, that's a fairly big number, are thinking of leaving their job. 49% of them don't know what to do to be successful. And if they are on a tight-knit team, they are less likely to be thinking of leaving their job. Indeed, as you can see in our little chart here, if they score higher, and that would be your green bar, on these key factors, they are less likely to be thinking of leaving their job. So if we want to think about the issues of retention, then we want to make sure we're paying attention to these kinds of experiences. So the first half of the book goes through the at-work experience framework and the context of understanding it. But the second half of the book is about the interventions that we think can help ensure that women have these experiences. And we'll make reference to this a little bit as we go along. Now, this research has been done over many years, and it was before the pandemic. And now the question became, okay, we always have remote working, but it's not the same as this remote working where everybody, well, is frightened, right? I hope we're coming out of that. But they're alone in their house. They are not interacting with their teammates. They are not interacting with their managers. They're interacting exactly as I'm interacting with you right now through a screen. It is not the same as remote work in the past. And so we had to stop and ask the question, which is the research we did last year, about is there a new understanding that we might take away, or what is the impact of remote working on some of these issues of women in tech and generally what is going on. So we launched a course with a remote team, the remote work project, to understand this. And we had open-ended survey data and also field interviews. And of course, we organized it, as we do all of our research, into themes and then looked at implications. And I just want to do a shout out to the key people who were both professionals and students. And so I hope some of your students are there today who helped us to get this work done. And just, you know, all of the work at WitUps is done by volunteers, worldwide volunteers. So if you're out there, we often do qualitative research followed by quant. So we're ready to do a survey based on our qualitative research. And if you want to help, please reach out to me. So let's understand what's really going on. Taking a step back, of course, there's years of CSEW and other kinds of academic work that's been done on remote work in a different context. And I want us to just keep this in mind because our data, you know, is similar to this, but understood in a little bit different way. So remote work impacts team collaboration. There's less cohesion, connection, less dynamic connection. If they identify strongly with the team, they're more likely to feel connected. They're more likely to put their whole into the work, and stereotyping is reduced. We also find that if the team and the manager and the department actually has clear goals, roles, processes, then everybody's more productive. Not so surprising. And of course, we know that all remote technology reduces interpersonal cues. If you have less interpersonal cues, then you have less data to understand what's really happening in the dynamics between people. So that means more miscommunication, especially if you're in different countries and you have language issues, more missing cues, and you're missing the cues that would tell you how your audience is doing so that you can respond, which is actually quite like I'm feeling right now because I can't see anybody. We also, and I want you to keep this top of mind, tech is already considered a masculine profession. Yes, even today. Yes, even with more women. And the result of that is both women and men think women are less qualified. So women are coming in already with dings against them. And in that context, what we have found, and we do find today, is that remote increases the likelihood of that kind of and other stereotypic perceptions of women, okay? And video on and video off is complicated. In the past, there was no video on, but now there's very good video, and it changes the experience. But it also means if you're looking at yourself, you may, focus a lot on your necklace or your nails or, all this kinds of how are you being perceived. And in the beginning, of course, with Zoom and others, you couldn't turn your own face off, right? So this is the pre-finding. So let's see what we found. All right, big issue. Connection and team cohesion. I actually can't talk enough about team cohesion because the difference in what it's like if we think of the dynamic valuing team as one of the very top things that we really need, anything that undermines it, anything that undermines belonging, anything that makes us take a step back from the team means that we're not putting our whole self in. And this is what we have to think about, okay? All right, so let's think back to what it was like before. Before we sat together, we had a sense of community. Even if we didn't work with the people all around us, we might go for walks with them. We had coffee. We might be playing games. We were socially connected to them, and we were socially connected to the people on our team. And we worked together. And talking about and connecting on personal issues and work went back and forth. No more in 100% remote context. And so the sense of belonging is undermined. The sense of connection is undermined. Yes, we might chat before meetings, right? But there is no chat really in the hallway. There is nothing that happens after the meeting. And so even if you have a little bit of chit chat, yeah, I'll learn your culture. But then we found people reported that the chat can take over. And so now the meeting doesn't get the meeting work done. Yes, people are doing come and have coffee with us if you want, blah, blah, blah. But over time that petered out. And the idea that you would set up a meeting just to chit chat with someone felt like not real work, right? So what we have to understand is that the very connective tissue of the team is being undermined if we're only meeting with each other for work purposes and in groups, okay? And if you carried on video off, particularly if you were a global team, because you got used to that, then it's even harder to connect with the video off. Over and over, people said to us, we don't know how to work with you if we don't know you. If we worked together before, and now we went remote, of course it was much easier because I already knew you. I knew your style. I knew how you collaborated. We collaborated in the past. But if you're new, even if you just came from a different part of the company, but you don't know this team, or you're starting with a new team, it's very hard to learn that person's real skills in the context in which the work is happening, particularly in groups of more than just one-to-one. Even global teams talked to us about how they used to sit next to each other. They would talk to each other. They might feel more alienated from the other global team, but they weren't alienated from each other. So they had less collaboration there, and they knew each other at least, okay? But now, if you were new, you would travel, you would go to the different cultures, you'd meet the people, you'd know those people, and then you could go back to being remote. But of course, in the pandemic, none of that happened. What we find over and over and over is if you want to get to know someone, if you want to know their styles, if you want to know what they really value, if you want to feel like you can work together, you got to have a one-on-one connection. And that means you got to find ways of partnering to do the work together. If it's one-on-one, it's easier to ask questions. And new hires were, they're like, yeah, I don't want to go to an office hour. I'm standing in line. Oh, I'm not comfortable. So we want to really think about this. And stereotyping simply increases when you're remote, especially if you're the lone woman, because then it's easy to fall back on your expectations for what women can do, what they are like, who they are. Like, oh, they should all be great managers because, they're social. Really? I don't think so. Not all women. Of course, if we have a few more women, now you can't just do that, right? Now you got to get to know each one of them individually. So we got to watch out for what's going on in this context. Now, all of this is really got huge impact on new hires of every type, because our new hire project, and please go check out the team onboarding checklist. You can download it. It's free. Our resources are free. We can help our new hires get started well. And this isn't just really new graduate, early new hires, okay? Anybody who's a new hire. But when new hires come in, they got to learn the organization. They got to learn the culture. They got to learn the team. They got to learn their managers, okay? But person after person after person is reporting they have much less support when they are remote. They do not have quick access to people as they did in the past. They would be uncomfortable reaching out, so there's more errors. It's harder to understand the culture. We already had endless reports that new hires will not reach out, but they sure won't reach out when they're remote. Maybe they'll bother somebody, they'll waste time, they might look dumb, they might look needy, okay? And part of our key recommendation is the manager in the team has to reach out to them. You have to do the reaching out. You don't give them a list of people. But the point is, this wasn't happening. Managers and coworkers aren't responsive when they are remote. I mean, people are absorbed in their own stuff, maybe, as we'll talk about next, the context for reaching out has been undermined. So they're not getting coaching, right? They're not getting encouraged. And it goes even the other way. When the senior people are new, then the group doesn't know their style. And if the senior person only talks to everybody, then they aren't having one-on-one. They don't really get to know them. And so now you don't know what's going to be successful with that person. Over and over and over, we're finding less connection, less connection, less connection. And less connection leads to not just relationship problems, but productivity problems. And this is being played out. And what was interesting is most people didn't actually understand how much they lost. Informal interaction, talk outside of meetings, lost collaboration, massive loss of information exchange. They didn't understand how critical it was to work. In the global, one story, that global meeting, the people in India were sitting together, they would help each other. They might have grabbed a story or two from what they were supposed to do. And if they didn't understand, somebody would look over their shoulder and they would give them advice. They could just ping the person in the United States who was their leader and ask what's going on. No, this wasn't happening anymore. So now everything became a trouble ticket if they had a problem. Or they worked things out inside of meetings. People who had talked to each other before meetings in the past are now talking in the meeting about what's going on. But also, we would go down the hall. We'd stick our nose in. We'd see if someone's available for a quick question or a little bit of a nag. Or we'd just start talking about whatever, a TV show, the news. But it turned into learning about their work, finding lost collaboration, realigning projects, even finding out things were happening over and over. People told us they would find out shockingly inside of meetings that something that impacted them was going on. Now, the bottom line is we cannot pretend that Slack or chat or whatever you want is replacing this. It simply isn't, okay? I mean, even the Slack people know this. I'd reached out to somebody and said, are you guys looking at this? So it may be, if you really know the person, you can ask a quick question. If you see that it's busy, it's like a shut door, but it's also like a shut opportunity, okay? Now they got to make a meeting to have a one-on-one. Now they got to look for meeting time. This is not the same thing as bumping, into them in the hall, in the coffee station, in the bathroom. There's enough of us now. We can do that too, ladies, okay? So maybe if I really know everybody and I've worked with them one-on-one, we can have a Slack chat discussion, but it is still not the same thing as being in the same place at the same time talking to each other. It feels formal. It feels awkward. And the result is the productivity, quality, and team cohesion right, is lost. And then people get mad at each other, they feel isolated, they're out of the loop. All right, so if we take all of this together, what do we have? Remote work undermines the dynamic valuing team. It undermines local role model coaching and support. It is undermining the sense of belonging, quality, just even knowing each other's value. So yes, does it have an impact on women in tech? Or we hope this also may apply to other underrepresented populations in some way. That's for you to figure out. We didn't study that explicitly, but we want to be paying attention to these things. All right, what's a second key finding? Getting the work done needs more structure. We're Zooming from meeting to meeting. We're in long meetings. You guys just said it a minute ago. Oh, people might be a little bit late because, in Zooming, we go from meeting to meeting. Well, of course, that's not what everyday work looked like. Otherwise, there was always some space in there for our informal interactions. Okay. So when we're doing this kind of thing, when are we going to chat? And then the meetings get long. If they're not well managed, they can feel chaotic, like they don't get to the point. This is what was reported to us. So people realized, managers realized that if they did not keep the meeting focused, if they did not introduce more structured practices, things were not going to get done and people were going to get really annoyed. All right, so what's wonderful, look, I've been talking about meeting structure and creating processes for a really long time, from the very beginning of my career. And no one ever wants to have a structured meeting, except if you're remote, it won't work any other way. Now, if there's a clear articulated process, it goes better. The Scrum practices that have a very high structure and they have associated collaborative tools, they started actually following the rules of these practices. Other kinds of meetings, they made agendas. They made sure they actually had a goal or a mission for the meeting. They prioritized topics. They put in time frames. They even did timekeeping. Wow. This is a great meeting process, and it helps in a remote meeting. But guess what, guys? It helps in any meeting. The other thing they did, this is such a long-standing finding back from Lucy Suchman. If you want to get something done, you got to hang over the same document. Everyone has to see the same thing at the same time. But now it's not the code that you're gathering around the computer or the napkin. Now we can see the Google Doc, the Agile tool, the PDF, whatever it is that you're sharing that you can now talk about. If we don't do this, if we don't share what we're talking about, what exactly is going on, then people get confused, there's more questions, and it's a problem. And what they discovered is that then they could capture their decisions and their commitments, and everyone would know what they were. Now, look, this is just good meeting practice, but it turns out that structure, knowing exactly what the practice is, how things are going to be run, women do better in that kind of an environment, okay? Now, the other thing that happened with the idea of structure, which I so love, okay, is they started to structure participation, because in the remote meeting, people are talking over each other. There isn't kind of a circle, really, because, well, your faces are displayed differently on different computers. So the first thing that happened is people started changing how they talked in a meeting, because no one knows if you're contributing unless you're talking. People who didn't used to talk in the past talk more, so more meeting time is taken up with that. Told you before, they had to stop and figure things out before, so they're wasting meeting time. Or people, particularly new hires, who are worried about speaking up or looking dumb, they won't ask a question, and so they lose clarification. So many people, team members and managers, realize if we structure participation, we'll actually achieve our goals. All right, round robin, what can I say? Round robin, round robin, round robin, okay? The best way to make sure we have everybody's point of view is to go around the room. And so we started to see more round robin happening, so we can hear what people have to say. Some people used a randomizer to stop people talking over each other. Sometimes the manager just called on people with hand raising, but of course that is always subject to more assumptions, stereotypes, etc. Okay, so we started to manage participation. What's also interesting is started to use more collaborative tools, which already manage interactions in small and large ways, right? Now, yes, did people have to adjust to Miro, Mural, whatever you're using, Figma, but then we can keep more people engaged. Simultaneous input on a design artifact or in an Agile meeting allows people to say what's going on. But we really want to have an understanding of that point of view with greater clarity. And so getting it, having a thought step, and then round robining to understand what people are saying is a really good way to go. And that's what people were trying. And they also found that even if you had a Figma thing and you were talking about it, if you didn't display it as a shared document to see where you were, people got lost. So when we have structured participation, rules of engagement, guess what? Voices are heard and interruption is reduced. So stepping back, diverse teams do better if they have high structure. Leaders who communicate clear goals, expectations, the meeting's goals, if the practice has a clear set of roles, how to do things, expected outcomes, if we're using that artifact, if there's a small enough people that everyone has airtime or some managed participation practice, and articulated rules of engagement relevant to that kind of meeting and criteria of goodness for decisions that can then be captured in the shared document. Nicole and I, if we're going to Kai, we're doing a remote course at this time on inclusion techniques for team practices. So please sign up and come and do some work with us on this. All right, so if we step back, remote meetings, we know we're going to be doing them. We know they are best if we are either all together or we are all remote. It did not work in the past to have two clumps of together people trying to relate to remote people. Hybrid participation, I don't even want to talk about how bad it is, okay? In our book, we have practices to help you think about how to structure meetings, the chapter on critique meeting, and also how to think about making explicit practices where we use Agile as the example. So those are ways for you to see more about what we are talking about. And, you know, so we're just super happy that our data on remote simply, you know, supports the kind of structure that we think is good for diverse teams anyway. All right, next piece. What about interpersonal dynamics? What about valuing and devaluing, feeling valued at work? What's going on with that? All right, I already talked to you in another time, and if you want to go see that one, it's still out there, about the Valuing and Jerk project that also a UMD set of students worked with me on, and the result of which is the posters that represent the characters. There's many of them, and there's a workshop that goes along with it. But our question on the table was, what happens in our understanding of valuing and jerk behavior when we're remote? And so we had a survey about it, and we got some answers, both qualitative and quantitative, on that survey. And the question was, I observed more valuing or jerk behavior since being remote. And overall, we would say that, you know, not a lot of people agreed. Most people did not. And that dovetails with our findings in our qualitative data. Now, were people looking for valuing? Yeah, just the same as face-to-face, just the same kinds of things as face-to-face, that people would take time to coach them, to champion them, that they would get statements of value about their skill, and that people would listen to them, right? And listen to their point of view. Yes, all those things are true. And we did see some companies putting in deliberate valuing practices, encouraging people to send valuing notes both during and after meetings, which is one of the best practices. We take a look at the jerk behavior. You know, our basic takeaway is jerks who were jerks before are jerks when they're after. I mean, basically a jerk's a jerk. If you're a screamer, megaphone mocker over there, right? Nobody liked you when you did that in the room, and we hate it if you do it when we are all working together. If you devalue my skill, if you demean me, if you talk harshly about me or others, if you don't listen, especially when you ask me to do something, I feel diminished. Now, the issue that rose up for us was that video off can make the criticism harsher, even from someone you think might be supportive, because it kind of comes out of nowhere. You don't see any of the nonverbals. You shouldn't be running critique or any kind of feedback session without your video on. And, you know, if we have video on, it's easier to manage negative interactions. Colleagues would start commiserating in the chat, you know, direct communication in the chat. They text support. They would strategize behind the scenes to intervene and do something about it. You could talk to your managers about it. You'd actually have some of the time a record, and maybe some of that would intervene. But the dealing with negative behavior still had to happen. But at the same time, if it is harder to do bad behavior when you're remote. I mean, you can't lean over the table. Does this look like, you know, no, you can't lean over the table. How tall you are cannot dominate the room. And if your video is on and you see yourself, you know, maybe you'll look at yourself and go, is that how I really, I don't know how I look. So I got a little ambivalence about turning off the self, you know, the self thing going on. But direct interaction is only one way of getting valuing, and I would be remiss if I did not report that if the team is giving me non-judgmental flexibility, if I feel that I can do homework balance better, it is a statement of value. It's a straight up statement of value, and it's a statement of value that we saw in the pandemic. Now, it's absolutely a fact that during the pandemic, women took a larger, you know, we went back to our sex role stereotypes. Women took a larger burden of childcare in the pandemic, right? Falling back on gender expectations. Some of them may have gone part-time, may have reduced their career, okay? But the reports we got from the people we talked to were about how non-judgmental flexibility was amazing and increased. First of all, managers became real people. We could see them at home. We saw them more willing to flex to their own home needs. We saw their kids, right? We saw that everybody needed a shift in how they balanced things during that time. We saw kids in meetings. We saw people caring for children. We saw, if you were nursing, you'd say, I'm gonna go, I need to be with my kid, turn your camera off, then come back later. We saw shorter work days. We saw more time off, and we saw a limit in expectations. And guess what? The work got done, didn't it? Yes, it did. So now we're seeing the backlash, right? Yeah, we're not going backwards. We still want less commute, more time at home. And companies have figured out they have to start flexing. They want it to be permanent. And, you know, when you flex, you go, you are a valued person. And that turns into team cohesion. And team cohesion turns into the dynamic valuing team, and that turns into more creativity and productivity. I can't even begin to tell you the importance of value. All right. We had a number of stories that I just need to include, okay? Because women were responding to the different demands on them because they were remote, because there was a change in expectations to own their voice and speak up. Sometimes the managers encouraged them to this stretch goal, and sometimes they chose for themselves. And I just want to tell a few stories, because what I love about it is it's such a great example of the push and support and growing your own personal power. One woman was very much against any kind of interruption, and she had become a product owner. Now she was a leader. She thought any interruptions were rude, but her manager came to her and said, look, if you don't control the talk in the meeting, it's a problem. It's your job. You need to be more present. And she said, I had to learn how to interrupt. And I knew I didn't feel good about it, but I took it on so that I could say, okay, we heard that. She could speak back and say, I heard you. Okay, we're going to move to the next topic. Okay, we've expended our time for this topic. We're going to move to the next topic. And over time, she became a person who managed the meeting and stopped thinking of it as interrupting and started thinking of it as leading. And her manager and her team were super grateful. Another woman who was she was level 3 in a help desk, had always, anytime anyone asked her to do anything, no matter if it was her level or not, she would just do it. But when she was remote, whether she felt safer behind that screen, she decided she wasn't taking on work that wasn't hers. And she got more confidence to say no and redirect people. Another woman realized that every time an opinion was asked of the group, she always just agreed to everything everybody said, that she didn't even form her own opinion. And now she said, wow, I did that. And then I made a huge error and didn't even know that I didn't understand the whole problem. I need to understand the whole problem so that I can take a stand. And so this developer made her own career goal. So we're seeing that in the remote context, it requires different skills, and women are stepping up, and I love it. But if we do not provide a reasonable response when they participate, if we do not provide support, you're going to get this last story where in the review, a woman was told, was a UX person, that she needed to speak up in meetings. She was in a meeting run by a different VP, and she thought, it was about changing the structure of a survey, that she had insight. She spoke up. The VP told her she had nothing of value to say, and he didn't want to hear from her, shut her down. She didn't participate again. Well, yeah, not good. If you're going to ask people to do a stretch goal, you better be sure that they're surrounded by support and the different people know what's going on. And when we looked at our best people who were working remotely, they knew that they had to support that person as they took on new jobs. And that's part of local role models. So we're seeing differences in how people are approaching their own participation, their own skill set when they are remote. This is, stories, but it's suggestive. Actually, it's quite interestingly suggestive for additional research. All right, now we've talked about video, and so I do want to talk a little bit about video, but it is very clear that video has an impact. Video has more visual cues. It lets us interpret interactions. They're more accurate. It's not the same thing as seeing the whole person, but it's a whole lot more than any other, having the video off. It can help interpersonal dynamics. It's absolutely essential to connect with the team and with new hires or anybody new on the team. We can see reactions. We can see if our ideas are coming across well. In presentations, I can't see if you're nodding. I don't even know if you're awake or asleep, right? And if something negative is going on, we can see and people can start to intervene. We have suggestion that video on may equalize power and help people speak up. As I said, body language isn't as powerful. Everyone's in their own box, and some women talk to us about simply feeling safer because they were here. They were just not there, okay? On the other hand, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that video on, when women see themselves, then they start thinking about, are they perfect? It kind of plays with their self, presentation of self and self-doubt. And so, luckily, we can turn ourself off in a meeting, which is probably a good idea. Although, as I said, if you see yourself being a jerk, it's kind of a great way to retrain yourself. So if you're doing some of those behaviors, you might want to watch yourself in a meeting. Now, so video on has got a lot of positives. It's leading more to good team dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, and also, cohesion. But we really do often turn video off, and then we lose all those cues. Global teams who know each other or other teams who know each other may do this. Global teams, because of bandwidth issues, And of course, when we're working at home and our kids are on and our spouse is on, we may really have bandwidth issues, but they need a way to get to know each other. And so, you know, it works if you know the people and the meeting structure is there. But if there's not meeting structure and you don't know them, the video off does not serve you well. Now, I know we're doing it for lots of good reasons, to respect privacy, reduce demand, right? On appearance, bandwidth, whatever. But we need to think about when that video's on and when that video's on. All right, so, you know, what's going to be our takeaway? Remote is a challenge. We want to build an overarching, more valuing culture. And we can take a look at some of our suggestions for this, the Valuing and Jerk chapter, and building a resilient team, using the team manifesto and process checks to become reflective. So these are some of the techniques we're suggesting and that you can read about and learn about on the WitOps website. So if we step back a little bit, look, remote working isn't going away. We know that. It isn't going away, but insofar as it undermines team cohesion and does some of the other things that we've been talking about, it's, you know, it's not as good for retention, and it's not as good for helping you feel connected to the company. And of course, we know that more people are quitting and changing jobs now than ever. I don't know exactly what that's about, but I'll bet a little bit of it is about this. But just to step back and kind of bring these two conversations together, what have we said? What does it do for the dynamic valuing team? It undermines dynamic, spontaneous interaction. It undermines the feeling of connection and cohesion unless we really work at it. And so it undermines creativity and productivity. For stimulating work, it's pushing a stereotypic perception that women have less skill, especially for a lone woman. And we have to have it in the top of our mind when we're giving out assignments. Are we thinking always the men are the ones who can do it? Or is it sneaking into our mind? Let's get some real facts about these people, get to know them as unique individuals. The push and support we find is just not happening as much. We don't have as much push, and we don't then have it kind of stepping into it so you can take on the stretch goal. There is not enough support. We have to work on that. That's particularly exacerbated for new hires. And if we do not take on the job of local role models, then, you know, for sure, we're not growing our professionals. We have to be much more deliberate about it. You can't just walk into the research lab at, you know, UMD and see the senior people if you're a junior people and kind of ask questions and know what's going on. You can't, you know, watch your manager. The manager can't have you sitting near their desk, lean over if you're a new hire and check in if you have a question. These things are just not possible in this context. But non-judgmental flexibility taught us we can, in fact, have a family. I would love to see us keep this. And if we do, we will increase team cohesion. And finally, if we become more valuing, if we have all these things and we are attentive, we can help our people who are in early career, and not just new hires, but all the way up to around 8 years, maybe more, build confidence, not just in their skill, not just in their product, but in how to manage an organization so they don't feel isolated, and that, which is going to undermine everything. Without attention, the more remote we are, the more attention we have to provide. And if we go back 2 or 3 days a week, I'm hoping we're going to get some of that back, but not if we pack every single day with now in-person meetings from one to the next to the next. So we really have to think about how we're structuring it. So that's our quick overview of some of the key findings. Please go to the WitOps website and go to our store. That's where a lot of our, you know, it's a store, but you don't pay for much. You can download some of our things, get the book. It's going to tell you and give you an introduction to these areas, etc.